So the purpose of our meeting is to look at possibly adopting and implementing the universal PAR for students with disabilities. So what it is, it's a technology piece of equipment that will allow us to understand if an electronic reader is the best accommodation for a student versus a human reader. So we'll go into the presentation. So when thinking about assistive technology and how we use accommodations for students with disabilities, we have to go back and think about the way we used to approach inclusion. When we used to think about inclusion, we thought about students that they had to fail in order to get them books on tape, to be able to get them assistive technologies. Now it's much different in this time. We really think about kids being in inclusion, and they really do have access to everything that's available because technology has just become much more readily available in classrooms. And so once students were failing, we would figure out how to get them their books on tape. And so what it turned into was that teachers who were very vocal got kids books on tape, or kids might get their own laptop if they were very severely disabled, like in reading specifically. And now, like I was saying earlier, it's just different. We monitor differently. Students have access. All students have access. We're fortunate that we have one-to-one here. So we're able to provide reading accommodations, and so that really takes us to a place where we really need to change our instructional practices as teachers. Because used to be, we had to pull our reading group together like we are now, and I'd say, okay, now you can't do anything until I come to read with you. Whereas now you can read on your own without me because we have assistive technology tools that you have access to. Mm-hmm. And so we really need to be thinking about how do we make sure that that's embedded the whole instructional period as opposed to just on testing. And I think that's a big shift for our teachers. So that's just the kind of graphic about how inclusion used to be and how now it's changed with the technology being available. Okay, so talking about barriers to inclusion. When we talk about reading disabilities, it's of the most common. It makes up about 50% of children that we serve for students with disabilities. So really meaning that these children have cognitive, average cognitive abilities, so they should be able to access text. They should be able to work with the curriculum. We just have to provide the appropriate accommodations. And so that really goes back to the thinking about how do we change our instructional practices as teachers. When we talk about making reading accommodations in the IEP, there's research here that supports that really a teacher is no better at deciding if accommodation is appropriate. It's like taking a chance. So how many times have you gotten an IEP that you've read and you're like, oh, that clearly is just what someone liked, so they wrote it as a goal. Same thing when we're thinking about reading accommodations. A teacher just felt strongly that they needed a reading accommodation. They're not using true information always about what type of reading accommodation is appropriate, or if it's even appropriate. Many times we have kids who, they may be reading below grade level, but when they get something read aloud to them, it actually worsens their comprehension. And so we're just making judgments. We don't actually have any data to help us make these decisions. So UPAR is a tool that can assist with that. And another piece to this is that I often will talk with special ed teachers, and the conversation is how they can't use a text reader. There's no way they can use a computer reader because they won't like it, and they make that choice for the student instead of really having information whether or not they could access it versus do they do better with human or electronic. And so that's similar in this kind of this statement here, is that it's kind of on what the teacher feels, not actually what is based off data. Does that make sense? Have you guys heard teachers talk like that about they won't put them on Google Read and Write because they don't think kids like the read aloud, the electronic read aloud?
Yeah, I've heard teachers say that before, and it's not always what the child needs. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think this is an interesting asset for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it allows them access now, mm-hmm. the student. Mm-hmm. So there are downfalls to both. So we have human reader and then we have text-to-speech. So we're going to compare both of them. So this is based on various research that's been done in the areas of read-aloud accommodations. And so with a human reader, your voice quality is different. You might mispronounce words. And actually, you can provide intonation or inflection where you shouldn't. And so you're providing extra commentary and we're teaching the kids to keep up as opposed to them understanding and being able to control of when they're reading. The second bullet is the most kind of, I guess the one that touches me the most. Students are reluctant to ask a human reader to reread test portions. That truly is a barrier for a child because they already have it read aloud. They probably don't want to prolong this process. They're not going to ask you to stop and read when everybody else is moving on. So having it be a human person really takes the student's control of learning out of their hands. They're dependent on someone else to facilitate their learning. Whereas if we look at a text reader, they are in control of being able to stop, pause, go back to a specific word, hear what they didn't understand independently. So, are any of those, do you guys identify with any of those, or do you feel any commentary about the human reader ones?
It makes me think of how sometimes when you're in conversation, how you don't want to ask somebody again, could you say that again? I didn't quite understand you. You know, and that's just kind of how we deal with situations as humans, is that we don't want to keep having somebody repeat themselves.
Right.
It makes me listen to it a limited times.
Yes. With text-to-speech. Yeah, so benefits of text-to-speech, I mean, the first is about decoding. So a lot of times when students don't learn to read, a very research-based intervention can be repeated readings where it highlights the word for them. And even though they're not readers, they start seeing the word more and more. What we know about students with disabilities is that they have to have more exposure to concepts. And so even though they can't read, they can comprehend. And the more they see the word said and it paired together, they're seeing and having access to more vocabulary and being able to see more reading patterns. So it does improve reading. And then the student can decide their own pace of reading, which we already talked about. And then many text readers often come with extra study tools, which is awesome. Like our Google Read It Right comes with many, many extra reading tools. So typically you'll have some word prediction options, some definition options, some highlighting options, which is, very beneficial, especially for struggling readers. So in IDEA, we're required, and you guys know this because you're special ed teachers, but we're required to provide them accessible instructional materials. And so typically when people hear that, they think, oh, we got to get them a book on tape. And so the other piece that we have to think about when we're talking about the way instruction has changed, we don't teach from textbooks anymore. So there's no just, let me put in the order for a book on tape for a student. We now have information at children's fingertips from all kinds of places. And there's no way, as a special ed teacher, for you to predict the website, the article, the book, whatever the gen ed teacher has decided to bring into the curriculum that day. And so in order for us to be able to provide our students real-time access to print, we need to teach them how to use electronic reading tools. Because there's no way for us to be able to provide books all the time, because we don't know what they're going to read. So when we think about AIM, accessible instructional materials, it's not just about books, it's about print access in general. And so we really have to take it back to our instructional practices have to change in the classroom. All right. So accommodations. Many people make the argument that what we were talking about, where a kid isn't engaged in the reading if it's not me. And so if it's an electronic reader, they're going to be bored with that. They won't like that. It's not as engaging as if it was me. Well, that's true, but access to materials in print version, in audio version, if they're printed, isn't about their attention. It's about leveling the playing field. Do they have access to it? Not does it engage them? And so that's also the other piece that we have to think about when we're talking to special ed teachers is that, it's not about this should be like bright lights and fireworks when they're reading. It's that they at least can hear what's being read to them. And so that's a shift as well, thinking about that. It's about leveling the playing field, not I'm going to keep you entertained and make sure you're keeping up. Does that make sense? I know, I don't know, how do you guys think teachers will, what their argument, or I don't know what they'll think about that, but it's a piece that it's a reality we have to address, Okay. All right. This one just talks about more about learning disabilities and reading disabilities. We'll move on from here. You guys know how access to accommodations, how it, gains you access to higher learning and being able to keep up their curriculum. So we'll move on from that one. Okay, so UPAR. So we talked about kind of why we need something different, because our goal is that we're going to change the way that we structure our instructional practices as special ed teachers. So when special ed teachers go into the room, we've got to figure out how they will teach their children to access print independently. And so UPAR is a tool that can help us show teachers, help them change that mindset, because that's a big mental model to change. But also, this tool will allow us to show them what their reading ability is and what it is with accommodations. Okay? So on this slide, there's several steps to implementing UPAR. So the first step is where you would actually do a student administration. And so this is where you would pull a student in, and it could take 40 minutes, and you could do it in a group of 25, you could do it in a group of 15, you could do it in a group of 10. You could do it one-on-one, however you want to do it. But because all of our students have individual devices, you could actually do a group of children because they're not doing the same assessment. And so they go through 3 reading passages. So they get on, they would do a silent read, and that's in order to gain a baseline for what their independent reading level is. So they would get 3 passages, that kind of find the middle base level for what their independent reading level is. And they get to choose the story, so they're given like different topics, and they get to choose what stories they want to hear. Okay? And so then that establishes a baseline. And then they'll do another version that's a human reader. Same thing, they'll get to choose what what stories they're listening to, and then they would it would be human reader reading it. And then that would establish what grade level are they able to achieve with a human read. Okay? And then they would move into another trial of text reader, and they would listen to stories with an electronic text reader, and then it would establish a grade level for them. And so then you get a printout, and it talks to you about the different levels. Okay? Any questions about kind of what that's like? And it's supposed to take between 30 and 40 minutes. You know, the login process is very simple for them. We would set it up together. We would make it pretty basic. So you would give them a username. We would put their names in advance. We would give them, I think we could name it whatever we wanted. So we could call it Barnett Shoals grade 1 or grade 5 if we were doing grade 5. And then we would just write their names in. And then when students go in, they go to the website and then they just type in Barnett Shoals 1 or grade 5, Barnett Shoals 5, and then they would just type their name and then it pops up and they're ready to go. They don't have to have a password or anything. So login shouldn't take that long. But it could take longer depending on how long it takes to find a true baseline in each 3 phrases. So if you have a student who is significantly below, it could take a lot longer. Does that make sense? But you can stop and start administration. So if you get to a point where you see a student's getting fatigued and they're not giving you a true effort, you can stop and come back and finish later. Okay? But it's intended to be about 30 minutes. Okay, so this is the type of report that we print out. And so with this report, we'll go over it in just a second about what the levels mean, but this report I feel like is going to be the facilitator for the special education teacher, because that's kind of who we're targeting changing the mental model. I feel like that's where I get resistance from teachers when I say, you know, they agree they need accommodations. They agree they need read aloud. They just want to be the one to read it aloud to the kid. And so this is, I think, if we hand this to them, they'll start understanding why we need to look at something different. Okay, so if you look at the first column, you see silent reading. Okay? And then grade 5 shows you where we estimated he should be on grade level. That's his grade, all right? And then he got to 43%. So that's not really a good instructional level. So he's not really reading on 5th grade. He's kind of a little bit below independent. Then you move to the adult read, which would be the human reader. And so you can see with a human reader, he actually could comprehend on an 8th grade level. And that's amazing. I mean, if you had a 5th grader that could actually access 8th grade level, it's amazing. Okay? And then if you look at text reader, he can access 8th grade reading level with a text reader. Now, he's a little bit stronger with a text reader. Not much. He was able to answer 67% of the comprehension on a 9th grade level. However, when we're thinking about mental models, showing a teacher that they can get to 8th grade level, regardless of what the reading accommodation is, human or electronic, is significant. Because even if I was supposed to be reading on a 5th grade level, and my human read maybe got me to an 8, but my text reader got me to a 6th or 7th grade level, I would still want to get them on the electronic read. I know that human's the best, and I would try to provide that as much as possible. We can provide different tools to do that, but I would want to make sure that I get them at least above where they are, closer to comprehension.
That would help with just the independence of it all, and maybe they would do more reading just for fun as opposed to just academic, which is going to strengthen their reading skills overall.
And at that point, it can be exposure to
still, same session, one session. And then, you can actually give this multiple times, and as many times as you want to hear. And so you could give this at the beginning of the year, kind of see where they are, and then develop goals with the student about showing them where they are if they truly use their reading accommodation. Because a lot of times we see that students don't want us to read to them, especially in our high schools. And I know we're not there, but in our high schools, this is huge. They don't want you reading to them anyways.
Right.
So train them how to use the tool, and then they will. And eventually, our hope is that we would get